Welcome back to the Neuroscience Meets SEL podcast, episode 22. This is Andrea Samadi. Today I have a guest who does not need an introduction if you're in the field of education. I have Marc Brackett. He's the founder and director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Study Center of Yale University. He's the lead developer of the Ruler approach, the 5 skills of emotional intelligence. Ruler is an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that's been adopted by nearly 2,000 pre-K through high schools across the US and in other countries, and the approach is seeing huge success. He also serves on the board of directors for COSL. Marc's new book, Permission to Feel, inspires a new mindset around the power of emotions to transform our lives. Using science, passion, and lively storytelling, this book serves as a guide for understanding our own and others' emotions, as well as provides innovative strategies for developing emotional intelligence in adults and children so that emotions help rather than hinder our success and well-being. I haven't been able to put his book down because it's captivated me. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, Marc, I'm thrilled, excited, motivated, and inspired to be speaking with you today. All those yellow, high energy and pleasant feelings in the mood meter chart, that
Great.
tool that you developed. I actually watched your talk at Google first before I read Permission to Feel. And I thought, I'm going to start to try to implement these strategies in my own household with my girls. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I thought it would be simple, just like when we added growth mindset into our homework slot. I thought, this is going to be easy and I'll have all these stories to tell Marc when I talk to him. And I had an eye-opening situation that showed me we're not as emotionally literate in our household as I thought. Can I share with you this scenario?
Please.
Okay, so a couple weekends ago, we went to see the movie Lion King. And my 2 girls were the only kids in the theater that were bawling their eyes out when Mustafa, the dad, dies. And I thought, so let's see if I can give my kids permission to feel and implement Marc's book. And so I said, why are you crying? And the oldest just pushed me away and grunted. And the youngest couldn't say anything at all. She was bawling her eyes out. And so I realized that we could be doing a better job in our home. And I'm surrounded by social emotional learning. I thought we were doing great, but clearly we aren't. So Marc, what happens when we deny the permission to feel? And where would you suggest anyone begin when implementing your Ruler approach, whether you're a parent, teacher, or an employee in the workplace?
Well, that's a big question. I think maybe I should give you a little bit of history about why I even called the book Permission to Feel, to give context to this. And so as a kid, I did not really feel I had the permission to have feelings. And in my book, I share kind of intimate details about my childhood, which was in many ways traumatic. And I had 2 great parents, but they didn't really know much about emotional intelligence. And they didn't really ask me how I was feeling, but nor did they appear to be open to hear what I had to say about my feelings. So my mom had a lot of anxiety issues, and she made it clear, like, if I tell her bad things are happening, she'll have a nervous breakdown. And my dad really was a tough guy who just wanted me to toughen up. So the challenge was that you learn, don't tell mommy how you're feeling, don't tell daddy how you're feeling, then you eat your feelings and suppress your feelings and act out your feelings, and the list of unhelpful ways that we tend to use our emotions. I can go on and on about that. And I was fortunate that I had this uncle who was my mom's brother, and he was a listener. He just had that facial expression that just said, I'm open, and invited me in to have the conversation. And so I say, he gave me the permission to feel because he was the person who asked the questions. He was the person who knew how to listen. And he also didn't say, what are you going to do about it? He said, all right, let's think through this together.
So if you think about how I was interacting with my kids, did I kind of put them on the spot, try to get?
I think, you have to know you have to know your audience.
Right.
So when I'm doing a talk in the corporate world, I don't ask everybody to hold their hands and let's look at each other's facial expressions.
Right.
I'd probably be thrown out, at that point. And with your own kids, you might have been stating the obvious. I'm thinking that in a movie where it's, there's a Lion King, it's an emotional scene, they might have been like, oh, come on, mom, like, really? Um,
I think
so
that's
that might have been, what's that? You think so?
that is what happened, I think, because
Yeah.
we talked about it a couple days later. I said, why wouldn't you tell me? And my oldest said, because you said it, that, we're sad. We don't want to talk about it.
Right. So, maybe they felt like you were patronizing them a little bit. I don't know. I'm just making this up right now.
Right.
But I think maybe the approach could be for you to just share how you felt and then have a conversation around what the causes were, as opposed to asking them what the causes were. Right. So just to, like, wow, that was so moving. And I'm so distraught over, what had happened. And what are you thinking about this? And then all of a sudden it becomes open, as opposed to, I think you have to be careful. And I'm not saying that you do this often, but I'm just putting it out there, of making it feel very script-like.
Yeah. That's
And I think
what I do.
in schools we see that too. It's like,
Right.
it's like, okay, everyone plot themselves. Next, why are you feeling that way? Next, and
Right.
it has to be more organic.
Okay. Got it. And that kind of brings me into my next question. What are things that we should avoid when we're trying to implement this? So avoid being too scripted. What are some other things? Because I definitely have not had any training whatsoever in how to talk about this with my kids.
It's very funny you say that, because I'll just share an anecdote that's related. A colleague of mine who has two boys, was reading my book, and she said, we're not a feeling family. It's just like they didn't, talk about feelings very much. And after reading a couple chapters, she said her son unsolicitedly called her and said, Mommy, I'm feeling kind of anxious today. And she was taken aback, like, gosh, my son has never called me to tell me how he felt. And then she said she was so taken aback, she didn't know what to say. And then she looked at me, she's like, I didn't get to the chapter yet about how to respond. And I was like, you're just his mom, but yet, we have phobias around feelings, and we're not sure how to respond, male children, female children, etc. So I think the first, is you have to be the role model, right? You've got to be a parent who talks about all feelings. And I think what happens oftentimes is that many parents really only want to talk to their kids about the positive things, because they don't want their kids to see them as weak or as not being able to protect them. When the truth is, it is just the opposite. The best example I have is, if you've heard me speak, I am quite vulnerable in my presentations and open about my own experiences in life. And I've had male parents, especially fathers, come up to me and say something like, I don't know how you do that. Like, you're so vulnerable, and, you shared, too much, and I could never do that with my son, because my son, I can't imagine my son knowing that I was bullied as a kid. And then I say to these parents, I say, well, what if your son is being bullied?
Right.
And the implicit message that you're sending is, you don't talk about these things.
Right.
What's the suffering that your son is going to go through, when maybe your son sees you as a great father, and then you could say, listen, honey, daddy had these terrible experiences too, but look at me today. I'm your dad, but yet there's this like weirdness, uncomfortableness around, being vulnerable, sharing negative emotions like shame or fear or anxiety.
Yeah, it's true. When I'm working in the classroom with students, they always want to know, when did things fail? They don't care about when everything went right. They're like, when did
Exactly.
things go wrong? And were you upset? Did you cry? They want to know everything, because they want to know how they can handle it.
100%.
So
It's part of this is making sure that we give permission to feel all emotions,
right.
not just the ones that that make us feel positive, because life is replete with negative and positive emotions. And if our goal is to just try to always talk about happiness, right, we're certainly not doing good things for the kids who are not feeling that way each day.
Exactly. Exactly. And when I was looking and surveying all the students that I'm working with, usually in the classroom, high school students, they're like your survey you said that you did with Lady Gaga, they're stressed, anxious. So they don't want to hear me coming in talking about how great things are. They want to hear about the challenges that I might be having so that they say, oh, she's had challenges too, but she can get through them, and so can we. So
Exactly.
it brings us all closer together. But so when I first opened Permission to Feel and I saw the mood chart, I just went to where I live in the chart and I was like, oh, this is great. And thinking about the strategies that I use to get to upbeat, meditation and exercise. And then I was thinking about other people in my world who live in anxious and stressed because of their work responsibilities. And then I thought, what are some strategies that you might have for people that are pressed for time, that don't have the time for meditation, exercise to create that work-life balance?
Yeah, I think, the meditation strategies are excellent. And, people think you have to be sitting on a cushion. You can do this while driving, maybe not go too deep into it though.
Right.
You can do it while taking a walk. And certainly exercise, like you just have to do it. You got to move.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we fail to teach are the cognitive strategies, and because they're really hard. And one thing I say often is that sadly for many children and adults, our self views are defined by other people. So if you're too short, or you're too tall, or you're too fat, or you're too skinny, or you're too dark, or too light, or too feminine, or too masculine, right? The list goes on for what people can say to make you feel bad about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It starts really early.
Yep.
And young children are highly impressionable and vulnerable. And I've seen this happen over and over again where negative talk just becomes rampant. And I always challenge parents and teachers and say, how much time do you spend having students evaluate their negative self-talk and try to shift it to a more positive self-talk or a reappraisal strategy?
Mm-hmm.
And I think importantly, like that is what we have to do. And there are techniques around this, right? One is to, for me, best example is I am prone to be more on the anxiety scale. I worry about everything and I worry about why I worry. And I did something wrong the other day. I was proud of myself. I was like, wow, you really have a good conscience, because I felt so guilty. And I was like, I couldn't let it go. It's like until I spoke to the person. And I actually, at the end, I was like, wow, like you have good moral development, Mark. I didn't know that you were so moral. But my point really is that during that process where I was like beating myself up for what I had said, like I really was driving myself crazy and, ruminating. And then I would say, all right, Mark, take a deep breath. Okay. How could you look at this from a different perspective? Right. It was one phrase that you said to somebody that kind of was unintentional. Like, is it really that bad?
Mm-hmm.
And then I felt better for a little while. And then, of course, I went back to my rumination. But my point is that, like, that's really hard work. And in the evenings, when I'm overwhelmed with everything I've got on my plate, I sit in bed sometimes and I'm like, I rehearse and rehearse, which makes me more anxious and then I can't fall asleep. And then I say something like, or I like catastrophize something like, it's going to be like the center is going to crumble. And then I'm just like, Mark, you're making this up.
Right.
And I think it's so important for people to learn how to become scientists about their own strategies and to take a step back and say, am I really making this up to be a self-saboteur? Or is there another way I can look at this so that I don't torment myself?
Yeah, like, is this true? Is this what you're thinking true? Is this going to happen? And normally the things we're ruminating about are not true. They're made up in our heads.
Or we're just trying to we don't know how else to think about it.
Right.
Oftentimes when I'm in airports and I'm like, this last week, I was traveling from a weird area of Maine, and I had to like get 3-hour car ride to then get to the airport. Then the flight was delayed 3 hours, and I was like, all right, what are you doing with your life? I just started going through this whole thing, like, why am I doing this presentation? I shouldn't have accepted the presentation. This is a waste of time. Like, I'm like, now I'm in this like place, and how am I going to get out of here? And I want to get stuck. And then I was like, Mark, take the high road. Tomorrow is going to be a better day. And, the truth was, I flew to Princeton, New Jersey, where my brother lives, and we had a great the next day. But like in the moment, we catastrophize. And the question is, can we, in that moment, take a step back and engage in a process that will help us not allow it to just have so much power over us?
Right. And that takes time and practice.
It takes adults working with kids on an ongoing basis to be good listeners, to ensure that their children are not going down that path of being that self-saboteur, which means dedicated parenting time, which means being a good listener, which means checking in regularly, and if it's not working, to not give up. You have to try another one. This is like a process that is, from really the beginning, of time or of your existence till the last day. Because development aligns with these things, right? Like now, I'm 50 years old, and, my mindsets are different. I'm in a long-term marriage for 20 something years, right? I've got a home, I've got relatives, and my mother-in-law lives with us. So now I'm dealing with my mother-in-law,
Yeah.
Anyhow, it's something that we have to practice regularly. And I'll just say one other thing about this is that these so-called soft skills are actually harder to learn than the hard skills.
Because seeing that. Yes.
The cold cognitive memorization of like 5 + 5 = 10, once you know that, you got it down pretty well.
Right.
But just because I used my positive self-talk 3 days ago doesn't mean that today, when someone triggers me, I'm going to be able to use it effectively.
Exactly. It's powerful. Well, why do you think it's so timely now with the rise in mental health issues that we have? We see the shocking statistics for our nation's youth with suicide epidemic, depression, and anxiety. It's so common at a young age. How did we arrive at this place where we still struggle to talk about how we feel, how even the most educated can still use some help with understanding our emotions and other people's emotions?
So I think, again, going back to permission to feel, the reason why I wrote the book was because there were so many books on emotional intelligence, and my mentors were the original theorists around emotional intelligence. But yet I saw people, when I would run around the world asking them, like, how are you feeling, struggle with being able to answer the question honestly and accurately. And either they didn't have an emotional vocabulary, or they wouldn't share because they felt vulnerable, or they would be seen as, like toxic or whatever the case might be. And I said, so we've got to go back to the basics here of just giving people the comfortable experiences to express their feelings, but also give them the vocabulary to express their feelings. And I think when your feelings are locked up inside of you and you don't have the ability to communicate them effectively, you suffer. I think there are a million other reasons why people experience unpleasant feelings, from being lost in social media for 6 to 7 hours a day and just constantly making social comparisons, to just, in America, the United States, politically, right, there's a lot of tension. And so students are just seeing people fighting all the time and people not getting along. So it's multi-layered. But it doesn't mean that we can't make a difference.
Yeah, by reading your book and implementing and following your work. And I did see that you're starting a blog on how to be an emotion scientist.
I am. I'm super excited about that. I've never done that before, but people are always asking me for different things, and I figure, why not stay in touch with people?
Yeah, because it's not easy to do this. We need some help.
Yeah, and I feel like it's like it kind of be like a post-study guide to my book, Um, and yeah, so I'm excited to just share the newest research that we do and just innovative practices to help people be better at regulating.
Wonderful. Where would we be able to find out about the blog so I can?
So on my website, it's just marcbrackett.com, and the website is really dedicated to my book, and it just says blog sign up, and um, click there, and it started today. Actually, our first post went out today.
Oh, yay. Well, I'll put this all in and be sure to share this. And what's your vision for where do you see this going for the book and Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence?
Well, I think first is that we need to make the case for why emotions are important and why they're not to be ignored or suppressed, that they're information. And we argue in our center that emotions matter for attention and learning, decision-making, relationships, mental health, and physical health, creativity, and everyday performance. And it's pretty undeniable at this point that how we feel and the strategies that we use to manage our feelings influence these 5 or 6 different areas. The second is that we've got to develop the skills. So RULER is an acronym for the 5 skills of emotional intelligence that I write about in my book. There's a chapter for each of the skills. We've got to get better at recognizing our own and others' emotions, understanding their causes and consequences, labeling them with the right words, knowing how and when to express them, and importantly, the strategies to regulate them. And then we've got to apply these skills, right, with our friends and families. We've got to apply them in school settings and in the workplace. So that's the vision I have, is that emotions become a central part to the way leaders lead, teachers teach, and students learn.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Mark. First of all, for writing the book the way you did, sharing your true self to show the importance of feeling emotions in our lives so we can truly reach those higher levels of achievement. It's definitely opened my eyes. It's a new way of thinking about these skills as we implement it. If anyone wants to reach you, the best way is through your website, marcbrackett.com.
Correct.
I'll be sure to put that in there and follow your blog and learn more about how to implement the RULER approach. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your information with the world.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.